All right, so get ready, because today we are going deep, really deep, into Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, A Brief History of Humankind.
It's a big one.
It is.
Mhm.
And I asked you to come on the show today because you sent over all these excerpts, and wow, this book is going to make us rethink, like, everything about being human.
It's not just like a history book, right?
Right.
It's really a challenge to a lot of our assumptions about what it means to be human, about progress, about happiness, about all these big questions.
And it covers a lot of ground, too, right? I mean, we're talking about from the Stone Age to, well, potentially the end of Homo sapiens.
Yeah, that's right.
So how does Harari even organize all of this?
Well, he structures the book around these four major revolutions. So you have the cognitive revolution, the agricultural revolution, then the unification of humankind under empires, and then finally the scientific revolution.
And through all these revolutions, he's asking some really interesting, I mean, some really mind-bending questions. Like, what does he even mean when he says that the agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud? Why did humans go from, like, hunting and gathering to building pyramids and empires?
Well, he's really getting at this core of what makes us human.
Okay.
And that is our ability to cooperate in large numbers based on shared myths and beliefs, things that don't really exist outside of our own minds.
So, like, what kinds of things?
Well, he calls them imagined orders.
Oh, okay.
And it's things like religions, nations, legal systems, even money.
Wait, money. Money is a shared myth. I got to hear more about this.
Well, think about it. Like, money itself doesn't have any inherent value.
Okay.
Like a dollar bill, it's just a piece of paper, right? But we all collectively agree that it has value, so we use it to trade, to build economies, to accumulate wealth. So it's fascinating how this purely imagined concept can have such a real impact on our lives.
Okay, that's mind-blowing. But before we get too far, let's rewind all the way back to that first revolution, that cognitive revolution.
Okay.
And Harari puts it around 70,000 years ago. So what happened back then that was so important?
Well, that's when sapiens, our ancestors, developed this ability that really set them apart from other human species that were around at the time, like Neanderthals.
Okay, so what was it?
They developed the ability to think symbolically and to communicate using complex language.
So it's not just, hey, food. It's more complex.
It is, yeah. It allowed them to share stories, myths, ideas, and that in turn enabled them to cooperate in larger and more complex ways.
So how do we know this happened? What's the proof?
There's physical evidence. So Harari talks about this thing called the Statel Lion Man figurine, which was found in Germany, and it dates back like 30,000 years.
What is that?
It's this tiny sculpture, and it depicts this creature that's half lion, half human.
A lion man. So they were already getting creative back then.
Yeah. And that's the point, right? This figurine, it's not a practical tool. It's not a hunting weapon. It's art.
Okay.
It's a product of imagination, abstract thought, and it suggests that early sapiens were already engaging in symbolic thinking, creating myths, possibly even had religious beliefs.
So this tiny little figurine gives us a glimpse into the minds of our ancient ancestors.
Yeah, their capacity for imagination.
And that imagination is what paved the way for everything that came after.
That's right. From those early myths and stories, we eventually get the imagined orders that underpin entire civilizations, from religions to legal systems to even, like we were talking about, money.
Okay, so from symbolic thinking and telling stories, we jump to the agricultural revolution. And that's where Harari drops that bombshell. History's biggest fraud.
Right.
But how can it be a fraud? I mean, didn't it lead to food security, settlements, like the basis for everything we have?
Well, think about what life was like for hunter-gatherers before agriculture.
Okay.
They had varied diets, they had plenty of leisure time, they weren't tied down to one location.
So they were kind of living the dream then?
In many ways, yeah. And then came agriculture, and suddenly humans are working longer hours, their diets became less diverse, and they were more susceptible to diseases from living in close proximity to animals.
Oh.
And they became dependent on just a few staple crops, which made them vulnerable to famine if those crops failed.
So instead of freedom, they get stuck in this cycle of just toil and worry.
Precisely. And Harari argues that agriculture didn't liberate humans, it trapped them.
Okay.
And he even draws these parallels to our modern lives, right? Where we work these long hours, we stress about the future, and we're constantly being told that we need more, more, more.
So are we really that different from those early farmers?
Yeah.
Just endlessly striving for this security but never quite reaching it.
That's the question, and that's what makes this statement so provocative, right?
Yeah,
It
fair.
forces us to really question our assumptions about progress and what actually makes for a good life.
It really does.
And that's just the beginning.
I know. There's so much more to unpack here. We've only just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
But we are going to have to leave it there for today. But don't worry, we'll be back next time to dive deeper into the world of sapiens.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. All right. So until then, keep those brains buzzing.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really makes you think, like, what is progress anyway? Or...
Exactly. And, we've got these humans now toiling away in the fields thanks to agriculture.
Yeah.
But how do we get from these little agricultural settlements to these massive empires that Harari talks about?
Well, that's the thing about agriculture, right? It created this surplus of food,
Okay.
and that surplus allowed for population growth and specialization.
Got it.
So not everyone had to farm anymore.
Right.
Some people could become artisans, priests, warriors, rulers. You get the whole hierarchy emerging.
So that's where we start to see those hierarchies, that social stratification.
Exactly. And that's where these imagined orders I was talking about,
Yeah,
they become really, really important, right? You need something to hold these larger, more complex societies together.
Yeah, you can't just rely on, everyone knowing each other and getting along.
Right.
So it's like you need a bigger story.
Right. A bigger story, a shared myth. And he gives some pretty vivid examples in the book, like Hammurabi's Code, the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, yeah, those are great examples. So Hammurabi's Code, that was one of the earliest known written law codes.
As far as we know.
And it created this whole system of justice based on this idea that the king's authority came from the gods.
Right. It gave him this
Yeah.
divine legitimacy.
Right. So it's not just brute force.
No.
It's about creating this whole belief system, this story.
Right. A story that justifies the power structure.
Okay, so that's Hammurabi's Code.
Uh-huh.
What about the Declaration of Independence? That's a very different story.
Yeah, a very different story.
But it's still an imagined order.
It is. So the Declaration of Independence, that's based on the idea that all men are created equal
Right.
and they have these unalienable rights.
Okay.
And so this shared belief in equality, individual liberty, that was foundational to the formation of the United States.
Yeah, so it's interesting how these imagined orders, they can be so different, yet they both serve to unite people under this common set of beliefs.
They give people a shared framework, right?
Right, a shared purpose.
And a sense of belonging.
And he uses another really interesting example, corporations.
Oh, yeah.
He says that they're imagined orders, too.
They are. Think about it.
Okay.
What is a corporation? It's a legal fiction.
Okay.
It allows a group of people to act as a single entity.
Right.
It exists only on paper,
Okay.
but we grant it rights and responsibilities.
Like it's a person.
Like it's a real person.
So these imagined orders, they really are everywhere,
They're everywhere.
shaping our societies, our lives in ways we don't even think about.
Right. We take them for granted.
And you said earlier that maybe the most powerful imagined order of all is money.
Arguably, yeah.
I mean, it still blows my mind that something with no inherent value
Right.
can have such a huge impact on the world.
It really is mind-boggling. And he traces the evolution of money in the book, from barter systems to cowrie shells, gold coins, and eventually the complex financial systems that we have today.
I mean, I was reading about the cowrie shells, and that just seems crazy to me.
It does, doesn't it?
Like, to think that these little shells were used as currency
I know.
across vast distances and for thousands of years.
It's amazing, right? Imagine trading like a plot of land for a handful of shells.
Yeah, seems ridiculous.
But it worked because everybody agreed that those shells had value.
It was a shared fiction.
It was a shared fiction that facilitated trade and allowed for the accumulation of wealth.
Okay, that's wild. And empires played a big role in spreading these shared fictions.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, both through conquest, obviously,
Yeah.
but also through more subtle forms of, like, cultural assimilation.
Yeah, that's right. So Harari talks about how empires often imposed their language, their laws, their beliefs on conquered peoples.
Right.
But he also points out that assimilation wasn't always forced. Sometimes it happened gradually, as people saw the benefits of adopting the dominant culture.
So like the Roman Empire, they granted citizenship to a lot of conquered people.
Yeah, they integrated them into Roman society.
And that helped to create...
A sense of unity
Yeah.
and loyalty across this vast and diverse empire.
Smart.
Yeah, very smart.
Okay, so empires obviously played a huge role,
Uh-huh.
but Harari also talks about the scientific revolution as this major turning point.
Yeah, and he describes it in a really interesting way. He calls it a revolution of ignorance.
A revolution of ignorance.
Yeah, and it wasn't that people suddenly became smarter.
Okay.
It's that they acknowledged their ignorance.
Oh, interesting.
And they embraced the idea that there were things they didn't know.
So it was a shift in thinking.
It was a shift in thinking, this willingness to admit that you don't have all the answers.
Okay.
And that was crucial to the development of modern science.
Wow, that's a pretty radical idea, especially coming out of the Middle Ages.
It is. It's a huge shift.
And this thirst for knowledge, it didn't stay confined to like the halls of academia.
Right.
It became intertwined with the ambitions of empires
Yeah.
and the pursuit of economic growth.
Because science offered these new tools, new technologies, right?
Right, that could be used for exploration, conquest, profit.
Yeah, and he gives the example of Captain James Cook's voyages,
Okay.
which really combined scientific observation with imperial expansion.
Okay.
So Cook's expeditions, they mapped new territories, they collected valuable data about the natural world,
Okay.
and they paved the way for European colonialism in the Pacific.
Right. So it's this reminder that scientific progress isn't always, purely altruistic.
Right.
It often goes hand in hand with political and economic interests.
Exactly. It's complicated.
It is. It's complicated and it's powerful. And it leads to a question.
Uh-huh.
We've seen these incredible advancements in medicine, technology, and our understanding of the universe.
Yeah.
But we've also seen the development of these incredibly destructive weapons and the environmental destruction that comes with industrialization.
So all this progress,
Right.
all this power we've accumulated.
It makes you wonder,
It does.
are we actually any happier?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Harari dives right into that paradox.
Okay.
We have more wealth,
Yeah.
more technology, more options than ever before,
Right.
yet rates of anxiety, depression, dissatisfaction, they're on the rise.
Yeah, it's like we keep reaching for that next thing, thinking it's going to be the key to happiness.
It's like the goalposts keep moving.
Exactly. And Harari is suggesting it might be our expectations,
Yeah.
that we're constantly bombarded with these images of success.
Right. Perfect bodies, perfect relationships, perfect homes, perfect lives.
Yeah, and so we end up feeling like we're always falling short.
Always comparing ourselves to these, often unrealistic ideals.
Okay, I can totally relate to that. I mean, scrolling through social media is like a recipe for feeling inadequate.
Yeah, it's like this highlight reel of everybody else's supposedly perfect lives.
And then he also talks about like the role of biochemistry.
Yeah.
So it's not just, advertising or social pressure.
Right.
It's like we're battling our own biology too.
It's true. He argues that our feelings are ultimately rooted in our biology. So even if we somehow manage to create like the perfect external conditions, our internal chemistry might still sabotage our efforts to find lasting joy.
Okay, so that's kind of a bleak outlook, isn't it? Like we're just doomed to be unhappy.
Well, it might seem that way at first, but there's also a liberating aspect to it, right?
Okay.
If we understand the role of biology, we can stop blaming ourselves for our negative emotions. Like it's not a personal failing, it's just how our brains are wired.
Okay.
And we can start exploring new ways to kind of manage our mental well-being through things like mindfulness, meditation, therapy. There are tools we can use.
So it's like taking ownership of our happiness rather than just expecting it to kind of magically appear.
Exactly. It's about being proactive.
Okay, but Harari doesn't stop at just like exploring the paradox of modern happiness.
No, he doesn't.
He goes even further into the future of humankind, and that's where things get really wild.
That's where he really goes out on a limb.
He does. So he says we're on the cusp of this new era, one where Homo sapiens, as we know it, might cease to exist.
It's a bold prediction.
It is. What makes him think that?
Well, he points to these three rapidly developing technologies.
Okay.
Genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the rise of cyborgs.
Wow.
And he suggests that these technologies have the potential to fundamentally alter our species, even maybe lead to the creation of entirely new life forms.
So it's not just incremental progress anymore. It's like this potential paradigm shift in what it means to be human.
Exactly. It's a whole new ballgame.
Okay, so break it down for me, genetic engineering. What's the potential there?
Well, with genetic engineering, we could enhance our cognitive abilities, eliminate diseases, potentially even extend our lifespans.
Who gets to decide, right?
That's the big question, right? Who gets to decide what constitutes an enhancement? And could we end up creating a society where only, the genetically privileged have access to these opportunities?
It's like something out of a sci-fi movie, but with some seriously ethical dilemmas to grapple with.
For sure.
Okay, what about artificial intelligence? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a huge what I mean, what happens when machines become more intelligent than us? Will they make decisions for us, even decisions that affect, our survival?
Yeah.
Will we even be able to control them at that point?
AI is already doing incredible things.
Yeah, and it's advancing so rapidly.
It's not hard to imagine a future where it surpasses human intelligence in at least some areas.
In many areas, probably.
Yeah, and then there's the rise of cyborgs.
Yeah, humans augmented with technology.
When we're already seeing that to some extent.
Yeah, prosthetics, implants, devices that can, enhance our physical and cognitive abilities.
Really?
But Harari's taking that idea further, envisioning this future where the line between human and machine becomes increasingly blurred.
I mean, it's fascinating and a little bit terrifying.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, what happens to our sense of self, our identity?
Right, what does it even mean to be human in that kind of world?
Big questions, and Harari doesn't really offer, like, easy answers.
No, he doesn't.
He's just laying out the possibilities, both, the utopian and the dystopian,
Mm-hmm.
and he's challenging us to think critically about the choices that we're making.
Yeah, because these are choices that will have real consequences.
Right, and this is where I think it gets really relevant for the average listener.
Yeah.
Like, what does all this mean for me? What's the takeaway from this whole whirlwind tour of human history and our potential future?
Well, I think Harari's book is ultimately a call to action. He's urging us to think deeply about the long-term consequences of our choices, especially when it comes to these emerging technologies. Like, what kind of future do we want to create? And are we willing to take responsibility for the choices that will shape that future?
So we're not just passive observers, we're active participants.
Exactly. And that's both empowering and a little bit scary, right?
It is. And I love that question he leaves us with.
Oh, yeah.
What do we want to want?
It's a question that really makes you stop and think.
It does. It's like, are we chasing after things that are ultimately going to leave us empty? Are we using these incredible technologies to create a better world? Or are we, sleepwalking into a dystopian future?
And I don't think there are any easy answers.
No. But the first step is to start asking these questions.
Absolutely.
So engage in these difficult conversations.
To be aware, to be thoughtful.
And to make conscious choices about the future that we want to build.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has certainly given us a lot to think about. We've journeyed from, those humble beginnings of sapiens all the way to the potential end of our species as we know it.
It's been quite a ride.
It has, through history, philosophy, even a glimpse into the future.
Yeah.
And I think the big takeaway is that, as Harari says, we're not just passive observers of history. We are active participants in shaping the future. And the choices we make today will have profound consequences for generations to come.
So choose wisely.
Choose wisely, right? So what resonated with you the most from our deep dive into Sapiens? What questions are you left with? Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning. That's what makes us human, after all. And who knows, maybe that's what will ultimately lead us to a future where both humanity and technology can thrive.
I like that. A future where they both thrive. That's a good goal to aim for.
It is, all right. Until next time.
Take care.